Hi everyone, Daljeet Peterson here from astrolab21.com, and welcome to the first installment of my new series, Blueprint of the Soul. And I'm really excited about launching this series. It's something I've wanted to do for quite a while, is what basically create what it amounts to, an Astrology 101 series. Like, what are the basics of astrology? And I wanted to share my experiences. I've studied astrology now for 20 plus years. And, over that time, I've learned a lot of techniques, and I've gathered a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, even some wisdoms and insights into how to read a birth chart and how to speak this language of astrology. Because that's really what it is. Astrology is a language. It's a very symbolic language. It's a rich language. It's a metaphorical language. It's a mystical language, but it's also very practical. But I can understand it's also can be very intimidating for anyone who really isn't familiar with a lot of the terms and a lot of the visual symbols, right? We have all these planetary glyphs. There's houses and signs and aspects, and there's the zodiac wheel itself. So if you're not familiar with a lot of these components, it can be really intimidating to look at a chart, and it looks literally like hieroglyphics, right? You're like, it's scary. But so I want to be able to make it more accessible, and the way we can do that is just to break it down into its component parts and really start at the foundational level, the elemental level, which is something I'm going to do in this series. And then we can build a foundation upon that, so that, layer by layer, brick by brick, we start to build up something that becomes really easily understood, right? Because we have a really solid foundation. So essentially, that's sort of the pitch. That's the overview of what I want to do. And so we'll have some graphics that'll reinforce this. Hopefully, some of these visual aids will help us learn some of these concepts, get a sense of some of the imagery and the nomenclature of astrology, of horoscope reading. But, essentially I want you to be able to read your chart for yourself, because what I really firmly believe in, what I want this series to really reinforce, is the fact that, your birth chart is the blueprint of your soul. And learning to read that blueprint allows you to become the architect of your own destiny. That's the pitch. So, without further ado, let's dive into the blueprint of the soul. All right, so I want to begin the series by introducing you to the concept of an energy approach to astrology. And, this isn't a new concept. It's actually a really old or ancient approach to understanding this ancient art and science. But it's an approach that I really first was exposed to when I read Stephen Arroyo's book, Astrology, Psychology, and the Four Elements, which he published back in 1975. And if you're not familiar with Stephen Arroyo's work, really great writer. He's really one of the great figures of the 20th century, late 20th century, and was really a key contributor to creating the modern personality-based system of astrology that we all practice today. And in it, he proposes, an energy approach, an elemental approach. Now, what do we mean by energy approach? Well, as we've learned, everything is energy, right? Everything is vibration, and whether we're taking a cue from the ancients or the moderns, right? Whether we look at metaphysics or modern quantum physics, whether we take sources from the East or the West, like everything is pointing to this idea that everything is energy. Everything is vibration, including us. We are pure energy. We are vibrational patterns. And once we take that understanding and learn how to use our energy, we understand that, how we use this energy greatly determines how we experience life, right? So this is connecting two very fundamental principles, energy and experience, and showing how those two are intimately related. So what we want to do to start here is let's use these two basic concepts of energy and experience, and let's use them to define some of the fundamental principles of astrology, right? And there really are 5 key principles, to my mind, that really make up the basics of astrology. And those are the elements, the signs, the houses, the planets, and the aspects, right? If we can work with those 5 components, those 5 principles, we really have everything that astrology is all about. So as our first order of business, what I want to do is define each of these 5 principles in terms of energy and experience. So let's try that. Okay, so let's start with elements. And let's define the elements as the energy substance of experience. And we can define the signs as the primary energy patterns and indications of specific qualities of experience. Then we can define the houses as representing fields of experience and places where our specific energies will be most easily expressed and directly encountered. Then we can define the planets as regulating the flow of energy and representing functions or dimensions of experience. And then lastly, we can define the aspects as revealing the dynamism and intensity of experience, as well as how these energies interact within us. So there we have 5 definitions, and don't feel like you have to memorize all these, okay? Don't be overwhelmed by it. We just want to sort of start to introduce these concepts and to explain them in a way that uses these 2 fundamental terms. So let's just take a little bit of a deeper look at these and break them down into their components, right? And we notice that with each of these definitions, we use the word energy and experience in a slightly different context, right? So when we look at the elements, we're describing them as the energy substance of experience, right? This is the most fundamental. This is why the elements are the more basic building blocks. Everything else is built off of this foundation of the elements. They are the essential, they are the very substance with which we are going to be working with in terms of energy and in terms of experience, right? And we see how we define the signs as energy patterns that describe qualities of experience. And then the houses are fields of experience. Planets are flows of energy and representing dimensions of experience. And the aspects are the dynamics, right? The dynamic energy. So maybe it'd be helpful if we could take all of these 5 principles and reduce each of them down to a single keyword that we can associate with each of these principles. So we could think of the elements as substance, right? And then we could think of the signs as qualities. We could think of the houses as fields. We can think of the planets as functions. And we can think of the aspects as dynamics, okay? So now it's a little bit easier for us to wrap our brain around. And still, I don't want you to feel like you have to memorize these. Maybe take a screenshot of them so you can refer to them later on. But, we're going to use these basic concepts and these basic definitions as our starting point to explore each of these principles in turn as we go through the subsequent episodes. So don't feel overwhelmed by them if these terms feel like they're hard to grasp. We're going to unpack them. We're going to really dive deep into each one, and you're going to get a sense of them as we move through the series. So just relax and stay with it. But really, I want to put this up first, and I want to start here because if we can use these 5 definitions and understand these 5 principles in these terms, then we are really well on our way to building a foundation for speaking the language of astrology. And that's what we want to do. We want to learn to speak this language fluently. And so these are key concepts. And so this is really the start I want to make here with this first video. Like I said, I'm going to try to keep these a little shorter. I'd love to keep them all under 15 or 20 minutes if I could. We'll see if I can keep to that promise. But so that's episode 1. Next episode, we will move on and look at the first of these 5 principles, which is the elements. And, just give you a little preview. We're going to look at the 4 elements of astrology. And, these aren't the same elements that we learned in the periodic table of elements in our high school chemistry class. These are different elements. These are metaphysical elements. They're archetypal elements, might be a better way of defining them. And there are 4 elements in astrology, which are fire, earth, air, and water. And essentially what we're going to learn is that everything in the phenomenal world can be described as being of some combination of one or more of these 4 elements, right? They're the basic building blocks of everything in the material world. So that's going to be our foundation for then moving on and understanding how the signs work, how the planets work, and so on. We're going to start with the elemental approach, an energy approach to the elements, which will then lead on to these other principles. Then we're going to build up from there and start at the bottom, start with the basics, and our concepts will grow and will become more complex as we add more of these principles and elements to the mix, so to speak. So that's it for the first episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's helpful. I hope you'll stick around for the whole series. I think we're going to learn a lot together. I think it's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be educational. And hopefully by the end of this series, we'll all be much more skilled at reading our own birth chart, at learning to read the blueprint of our souls, right? So that we can become architects of our own destinies. All right, until next time, thanks for watching, everyone. Sat Nam.